I am the head organizer of New Orleans Acorn. I am from the Lower Ninth Ward. I live there right now. 75% of my family lives in the Lower Ninth Ward. And it became a very critical piece of Acorn's post-Katrina work in New Orleans. I want to back you up to August 29, 2005. I can tell you what I was doing. I was sitting on the side of a bed in a hotel room in Lafayette. And I was watching water inundate my neighborhood. And that feeling of helplessness was incredible. And knowing that I would not be returning home for quite some time, or feeling that I would not be returning home for quite some time. So what do you do? Katrina brought about quite a few things that were unexpected in a lot of different ways. Obviously, there was the images that we all understand. I didn't bring those images with me today. The images that we've seen on television, that we have witnessed time and time again, of the Superdome and the Convention Center, the flooding, the devastation, in some instances the bodies, and the wrath of the levees opening up on our city. But it brought about some changes in terms of people's waking up, sort of waking up the sleeping giants that lay in each of these communities. Acorn has been organizing in New Orleans since 1976. Before Katrina, we had 9,000 member families in the city of New Orleans. The Lower Ninth Ward hosted about 1,000 members, 1,000 member families, because if you're a member, your family's a member of Acorn. It's a household thing. And I think that our members understood that they understood organizing, they understood what needed to happen, they understood pushing the buttons of government in order to get the results they desired. They understood winning in a lot of cases. We were instrumental in a lot of different things in New Orleans before the storm, and our members were active. I think that there was some sweeping changes that probably need to happen in the city of New Orleans in terms of involvement and engagement of more of our residents. That's the only sweeping changes I'm talking about. Because once the storm hit, I think that most of our members got the sense that there was something that there was an attempt to ethnically cleanse the city of New Orleans. And I don't think anybody who is of a progressive mind, who is of an open mind, who actually has two brain cells to rub together, couldn't have seen that was actually the plan. In the beginning stages of the storm, we heard comments from Jim Reese, who is a part of, in the Wall Street Journal, for God's sakes, who is a part of the business community in the city of New Orleans, say that, old money is going to pull out of New Orleans if it doesn't change post-Katrina. We heard Alphonse Jackson say that HUD would not be making the type of investment in the city of New Orleans post-Katrina as it did before. We heard what they were saying. Our members understood what they were saying, and reading between the lines and understanding what was about to happen. The mayor of New Orleans got together the Bring New Orleans Back Commission, and that commission said that certain neighborhoods, shrinking the footprint of the city of New Orleans would be the best idea. And that certain neighborhoods could not come back because they were so dangerous to come back to. And that in itself sort of, I guess, was it sounded the horn for a lot of our folks to say, something is afoot. This doesn't make any sense. So we went into action. At this point, I'm in Baton Rouge. I had gotten a text message from, at this point, let me back it up just a little bit. My mother joined Acorn about 26 years ago, and she passed away last year. She joined Acorn about 26 years ago. We've been members of Acorn for that many years. And she joined because she wanted to buy a house, and then she started to sort of get pulled into meetings community meetings. And she was semi-active, and she was a working mother. She had 2 jobs, and she was active in various ways. We sort of got a little bit more closely acquainted with Acorn right before the storm happened. And we had our really big action in Lower Ninth Ward in April of '05. It was a great action, and I'm not going to go into details of it. It was a fabulous action. At any rate, the bottom line was I got a text message. I was on the road, Katrina had happened. I got a text message. No cell phones were working. There was no service anywhere. You couldn't reach anybody. A cow couldn't find his calf. And all of a sudden, I get a text message, and it said, "This is Acorn. Where are you?" And my immediate thought was, we ain't going to no meeting. We trying to evacuate. Because, Acorn is, we will call everybody for meetings. I mean, a lot of meetings, a lot of actions. And that was the first thing I thought of. And that text message was the beginning of my role in this whole piece. That text message said that we're at 5177 Greenwell Springs in Baton Rouge. If you can make it there, make it there. And my family and I got settled into a shelter from that point on. I went to Baton Rouge and I started working, and I ain't stopped since. But actually, what it sort of started in Baton Rouge and what we call the bunker. When I walked into the Acorn office, I found Steve Bradbury, who's the former head organizer of New Orleans Acorn and works with Acorn National now as a campaign coordinator, and Marie Hurt, who is now the statewide director, she's the head organizer of the state of Louisiana. And I found a lot of other senior staff and members in that office trying desperately to find people. And we sat down and started to go to work. Baton Rouge holds a strange place in my heart. I love it and hate it at the same time because I had to be there and didn't want to be there. But while we were there, I think that it was a critical point for us to sort of strategize what we were going to do. So fast forwarding, and also in Baton Rouge, I found myself, if you can believe this one, because our family had moved into a shelter a little bit closer to New Orleans, I found myself working in Baton Rouge and living with the father of Acorn, Wade Rathke. Now that was a strange set of circumstances if I've ever seen one. But I think that we all sort of came together. It was the Acorn crew coming together, sort of basically beginning what we would actually, forming the strategies for moving forward and how to make things happen, how to make things shake with the knowledge that we had. Now fast forward back to the Bring Back New Orleans Commission and shrinking the footprint of New Orleans and what would happen and which neighborhoods would be shrunk and which neighborhoods would be eliminated. Those neighborhoods were New Orleans East, Gentilly, and the Lower Ninth Ward. These 3 actually, and Broadmoor was included in that as well. But the 3 neighborhoods, Gentilly, New Orleans East, and the Lower Ninth Ward, all had 3 very similar components. They were different, but they were the same in some ways. The New Orleans East area is middle-class Black neighborhood homeowners, high population of homeowners. Gentilly, an old Black subdivision in the city of New Orleans, lots of homeowners. Lower Ninth Ward, working-class neighborhood, 70% home ownership. And that's what gives a lot of, I think most people don't understand, I think the drive to go back there and what drove a lot of people. My personal drive in order to get back to the Lower Ninth Ward was about the fact that that was a neighborhood that I don't think you could replicate that anywhere. I think that it's not a very common thing around this country to have working class homeowners in those numbers. And I did not want to see. And my grandfather worked, he was a longshoreman, he worked for 35 years on the riverfront. He was a broken man at the end of that stint on the riverfront. His knees were shot, his ankles were shot. He had fell 25 feet in the ship hold and almost severed off his ankle. He couldn't hear out of one of his ears because of all the noise and the dropping. And of course, he had tremendous back pain. He used to walk with a limp and leaned over. And he worked those 35 years for that piece of property right there in the Lower Ninth Ward because that was where he was a man. That was his piece of the American dream. Home ownership. His manhood was tested on a daily basis every day at work. But that was his piece of the American dream. You couldn't tell him nothing on Delaware Street. But the bottom line is that, that was my personal drive at that point. And so we began to engage and we began to strategize. The strange thing about it is one of our main leaders actually was located, when we relocated to Baton Rouge for that period of time, one of our leaders who was, forged out of this battle, Vanessa Garinger, was living right around the corner from the Baton Rouge Acorn office, which was just an amazing set of circumstances for all of us. This is one of the women who sprang into action, one of our leaders who sprang into action immediately. And I'm going to just basically start a slideshow, and I'm starting with the gutting project because it's out of sync. No, I'm starting to talk about going back to New Orleans and what we were doing and what we were thinking. Well, the key was to save as much housing stock as humanly possible. And we knew that we couldn't gut every house. Gutting is basically removing the debris from a house in order to save the house. You start the rebuilding process by gutting. That's an important statement. That's an important thing to realize. You start the rebuilding process by gutting. When we started gutting houses, you would go back to New Orleans and you would see vastly nothing. You would see very few people in our neighborhoods, in the Acorn neighborhoods and the low and moderate income neighborhoods. But when you saw debris that came from a house, you understood that somebody was starting that process. Somebody was doing something. So Acorn actually raised money, got together, got a gutting crew, and gutted thousands of homes and started that process. We couldn't gut them all, but we could actually sort of help people to begin that process of rebuilding. And I always tell people about gutting. I always say, it's near and dear to my heart because when you look at a gutted house, what you see is I always tell people, like, when you look at it, if you look at that top picture, that top picture is my house after the storm. But if you look at that top picture, you don't know where to start. When we started gutting, a gutted house looks like a house that's under construction. So I think it's sort of a part of what we're doing was trying to change not just the conversation, but the mindset of the people of New Orleans with that piece. And I think that we did a pretty good job. But the bottom line was we had to get back in, and we started with a series of marches and protests. We had to get down to the actual organizing work. And the first protest, the first march that we did was to actually re-enter the lower Ninth Ward. Again, going back to that plan that was actually going to eliminate certain neighborhoods in the city that could actually change the voting dynamic of the city of New Orleans if these plans were to go forward. And we staged, again, many protests, many actions to get back in. One of which was, let's start that. Let's start the campaign to re-enter the lower Ninth Ward. But one of which was the no bulldozing campaign. That was actually one of the first. I mean, all these things are small bits and pieces that form a larger puzzle under the umbrella of right of return, ensuring people's right of return, and ensuring people's rights, period. When we actually started out when we started out organizing, we got a call from one of our members who said that someone she had seen her house. She had come in, sneaked in, because we could not enter the lower Ninth Ward legally until December 1st, 2005. Everyone else sort of came in, trickled in the weeks after the storm, and we could not legally enter our property until December 1st, 2005. There were actually armed guardsmen. There were National Guardsmen with M16 rifles standing outside of each of the entryways into our blocks, so that we could not, on the main entry, so we could not enter the lower Ninth Ward. But this woman said she sneaked in, because snuck is not a word, y'all. She sneaked in and she saw her house. Her house was where it was before. It just probably needed to be gutted. Obviously, it needed to be gutted. We took about 18 to 20 feet of water in the lower Ninth Ward. Needed to be gutted, and she said, she wanted to get back in and get her property together. She comes back again, and the house is gone. And that spurred the no bulldozing campaign, where we were saying, wait a minute, if the residents aren't able to enter to see their property, why are you able to enter with a bulldozer to knock it down, not knowing whether or not there's something there to save? And that campaign was about people's rights. It was about the rights of homeowners. It was about the right to see your property, because God knows, and you never want these kinds of things to happen, but God knows if a tornado whips through the heartland right now and there's nothing but sticks left, the next day people are out there looking at their sticks. And I think that our people deserve the right to actually see what was left, so that you understood what you were working with, that maybe your house could be saved. There was, a lot of people were saying there was a mass order to bulldoze everything, to raise everything in the lower Ninth Ward, which would have been a tragedy for people like me, who lived in a house that took 18 feet of water, yet after it was gutted, it cost me about $55,000 to get back in my house. Had I had to replace that house, it would have cost me between $130,000 and $150,000, depending on what, how fancy I wanted it, probably more in certain circumstances. So I think that, that campaign definitely was about respect. And next we move into our campaign, our protest in Baton Rouge and our right to return. And of course, obviously it was all centered around the right of return. But what started to happen actually was that we began to come up against different points at which eminent domain and issues of property rights were starting to be, challenged for our people. And one of which was actually a bill that was put in place that would actually make politicians, it was the bill basically was structured so that politicians, people who were handpicked by politicians, would be in charge of any properties that were sold to the state by a homeowner who did not want to return, making this body, this entity, the largest landowner in the lower Ninth Ward, and actually, in our eyes, reversing, and with a lot of post-Katrina activities by the government and other entities sought to achieve, and that is reversing all of the home ownership that had taken place over the last 35, 40 years. All of the gains that had taken place in terms of people being able to transfer wealth in the form of real estate. Poor people being able to transfer wealth in the form of real estate. People of color being able to transfer wealth in the form of real estate. And that was very, apparently, that's not something we wanted. And so our fights go on, and I'm not gonna bore you with all the details of each one of them. But one of the main things that came out of this was we had a conference in Baton Rouge in November of 2005. And we brought together people, your average citizens, our members, and people from the planning communities, planners, architects, to talk about what was possible, what wasn't possible. This plan that was put together by the mayor and the Bring Back New Orleans Commission did not, it was basically about excluding our people, and we didn't understand all the facts. So we decided to get planners, people who understood exactly what the facts were, together with residents so they can ask those questions. The thing that came out of this planning process was that a lot of our residents understood that the lower Ninth Ward and other neighborhoods, well, the lower Ninth Ward is not the lower Ninth Ward because it's low, it's the lower Ninth Ward because it's below, it's going downriver. The actual geographic, a lot of people argue the fact about, should you go back to such a dangerous area, it's prone to flooding. No, it's not. It's prone to ambush. But the bottom line is that the neighborhood, that was one of the things that we found out. There are certain neighborhoods that were not. The reasons that were given inside of the initial plan were not true. A lot of these things were debunked by the planning process that took place with a joint effort with ACORN and our university partners. That was the People's Plan. It was the People's Plan for rebuilding the Ninth. And it encompassed true community input. The original plan, the Bring New Orleans Back plan, had no community input, couldn't have. Everybody was everywhere. Nobody was there. So there was no community input there. This plan actually sat down with hundreds and hundreds. We pulled in hundreds and hundreds of people from our neighborhoods to actually make this plan take shape and come alive, and actually put truth into planning and put people into planning and have people own a piece of the plan to redevelop their neighborhoods and their communities. And out of a lot of this, we won the right to return to the lower Ninth Ward. We won utilities being restored in the lower Ninth Ward, which were 6 to 8 months after everyone else. And those were battles, again, that ACORN engaged in wholeheartedly and fully, and they provided momentum to move forward on a lot of other programs, and the first of which is the first this is actually a byproduct of that planning process and our university partnerships. The first 2 new homes to be built in the Lower Ninth Ward post-Katrina were built by Acorn Housing and LSU. It was a collaborative effort. And these 2 houses were not just about building 2 houses. These 2 houses could have been built. The point was, these 2 houses signaled the return of the rest of the community. It signaled reinvestment. And well, one of those little people is my grandmother, actually. The little one is my grandmother. And her home now sits where her husband wanted her to stay, live and die throughout her years, right there at 2310 Delaware Street, because of this project and because of the work that we've done in that neighborhood. But again, it spurred development. So those 2 houses were built about a year ago, and so now you have about maybe 50 people who are building in that area right now, because that sparked the redevelopment of the neighborhood, and all because, we fight. So we get to March 29th, 2007, and a fellow by the name of Ed Blakely came to town, and he's reluctantly called the recovery czar for the city of New Orleans, and he's heading the recovery effort, and he invited our board in to talk to him about the master plan. And he told us, the first thing he said to us was, I know who you are and I know what you do. Let's just kind of work together on this thing. And I thought that was kind of a strange opening, but he said that he had taken the People's Plan into consideration, serious consideration, and a lot of the People's Plan was used inside the master plan for the city of New Orleans, because it was an extraordinary document, and it did have community participation, and it did have truth to it. And so we actually got, after the announcement of the master plan was done, Acorn was the only nonprofit that was standing there as that announcement was made. And he announced that $117 million would be allocated to the hardest hit areas, and it would be shared between the Lower Ninth Ward and New Orleans East area. We thought this was a tremendous victory for a neighborhood that just a year and a half before that was written off the map. Now we were getting half of the recovery dollars that was supposed to come into the city for recovery. And we thought that was a tremendous victory for our members and for our neighborhood. Okay. I'm nothing if I'm not obedient, but okay. But let me just say this to you. The real fight, and I think that you alluded to this, the real fight is making sure that those dollars go into our neighborhoods. What we're seeing now, and this is something that most of you should be aware of, because we're beginning a new campaign, it's Equity and Rebuilding. After we were promised those dollars, it was an exciting, wonderful time for our people. When the money started to flow at the beginning of this year into recovery projects, we haven't seen one crane in the skyline. Most of the work that has been done in Lower Ninth Ward has been done by Acorn, community groups like Acorn, churches and private, and people's own, taking their 501c3s and college funds and everything else and reinvesting in their neighborhoods. What we want to see right now is that promise that was made to us on March 29, 2007 become a reality. And to not have all that we fought for go to rich uptown neighborhoods for their development projects that they've been wishing for and hoping for years and years and years, and now have an opportunity to have on our backs, on the backs of our misery. We fought really hard for this, and let me just tell you this. We believe all that, the protests and the chanting and the mantra, the people united will never be defeated, it rings true. We will continue to fight. We will continue to make sure that there's equity in every piece of everything that goes on in the city of New Orleans. Acorn is not going anywhere. We are ready. We have been true to that mantra, and we will forever be true to that mantra. The people united will never be defeated.